welcome to Addicted to Murder. This is Cortney, licensed professional counselor with over a decade of experience.
And this is Trisha, and I feel hugger-mugger when I do my taxes.
Hugger-mugger?
Mm-hmm.
That feels like it would be a good thing, but I'm guessing it's not a good thing.
It's confusion.
Oh.
Yeah.
Fair.
There was, I did my taxes this year and Chris's taxes this year, and there was that kicker.
Right.
And what I had thought we were going to get back for him was not right, I guess, because lines blah, blah, blah meet la, 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 and I just get confused on it.
It is hard because we have to do the federal and the state income taxes here.
Right.
Not every state has income tax.
No. So, my cousin that moved here from a state that didn't have income tax, she's like, I would way rather have sales tax than income tax because the income tax is really high in Oregon. I'm used to it. But
Yeah. That's what my parents live up in Washington. And they're the same.
yeah. So, I don't know if it's a deterrent or, but like in Oregon, there is no sales tax. I think us in New Jersey are like the only states that don't have sales tax, but we have really high income tax.
Right.
So like I said, I'm used to it. So I don't know any different. I'm just used to like a third of my paycheck being taken out in taxes.
Yep. Pretty much.
Yeah. It's a lot, but you have even more confusing taxes than me because you're like an independent contractor.
Right. Yeah. So I have to do like the self-employment tax
And like you don't have it taken out per paycheck, so you have to like save up for it.
Yep. And I do like quarterly estimated taxes, and it's a big mess.
Yeah. Did you get yours done?
Yes.
Tax day is coming, April 15th.
Yeah. We did our taxes. We'd always do our taxes early.
Nice.
So.
Well, we got ours done too, but I was confused. So, anyhow, we are not doing a case today. We're doing a
special.
What did we call these? Breakdown?
Mental health breakdown?
I can't remember what we called them. We called them something. We've done ASPD and NPD.
NPD. And I feel like we did another one.
Well, we did some on our YouTube channels.
When we were doing that.
When we were doing videos, and then that just got to be too much. Like, we can't really edit those, or I don't know how. And then it was all about, are we camera ready?
Right, exactly.
And our vanity came into play.
A little bit.
Our extreme vanity.
Yes.
But so, so Cortney is going to be doing most all of this episode. I will have a question here and there that I will pepper you with.
Right. But first, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So as we are recording this is in fact Easter Sunday. Happy Easter.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. So I have a pretty basic question today.
Okay. I'm a basic bitch.
All right. Chocolate bunnies or jelly beans?
Oh, chocolate bunnies. Unless they're like the shitty hollow ones that taste like crap. But even then, probably a chocolate bunny.
Yeah, I
Although
agree.
Jelly Bellies, I like the popcorn flavor. I know
Really?
it's really weird. Nobody likes that kind.
Yeah, I'm also a chocolate bunny girl.
But what Jelly Belly would you do?
I don't really like the Jelly Bellies.
Oh.
I like the like the Starburst or like the Jolly Rancher jelly beans. And I love the green ones, which are sometimes lime and sometimes green apple, but I love them either way.
I would like the apple. I'm not so much on the citrus lime. But okay.
Yeah.
Did you get anything for Easter?
I bought myself a bag of candy.
I'm going to my parents for dinner. Sometimes they get us something, sometimes not. I don't know. But my nephew will be there, so he'll probably get some sort of Easter basket.
Probably.
Yeah, from my mom. So, all right. Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
It looks like you want to shout out to someone, Cortney.
I also, so we've got a new listener as of a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
She is the teenage daughter of one of my coworkers.
Okay.
Who apparently...
The younger crowd.
Yes, the younger crowd, who apparently really loved our episodes about the Casanova killer.
Really?
So, shout out to Autumn. Thank you for listening.
Hey, girl, hey.
Tell your friends.
Well, since we're bringing this up, I don't know if I've done this in the past, but Lisa's been a long time listener. And if I haven't, Lisa, shout out to you for listening. She talks to me about our episodes all the time. And she has like told me about some crazy cool podcasts that she just is always listening to podcasts. One of them is like something about crazy shit that happens in our national parks.
Oh, yeah. I think I've listened to that one.
Yeah, I haven't started, but she makes it sound like it's pretty interesting.
Yes,
Yeah, like
it is.
weird shit that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure you guys could find that if you wanted to. But yeah. Okay, well, Courtney, take it away.
Okay, so we have talked about reactive attachment disorder, also known as RAD, way back in our very first episode when we covered Ted Bundy. And so we've mentioned it here or there since then, but we haven't really gone in depth into reactive attachment disorder. So here we go.
First question. You, in the psychology world, you don't call it RAD, you call it RAD. Because
Yes.
I looked at it as RAD.
I mean, we call it RAD.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, if it makes a word, you might as well say it.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, one reason that we have not spent as much time on reactive attachment disorder is that it's incredibly rare. So, it's estimated that less than like 1% of children will meet the criteria for RAD. And it's most commonly diagnosed in children who have been placed into foster care or orphanages and those who have experienced severe neglect or abuse. So, even with the number of killers that we've talked about that have horrible childhoods, very few likely had RAD.
So I didn't realize how rare this disorder really was. And I think maybe because of the populations that you and I deal with, we maybe see it more often than the average person. So I kind of thought lots of kids had RAD. But what you're saying is that it's not common at all. I mean, it's like comparable with DID.
Yeah, so I think
Or did.
that one is DID.
Okay.
I don't make the rules, I just follow them.
Okay.
So there are many, many people who have attachment wounds or problematic attachment styles, but RAD itself is sort of like the very extreme presentation of those.
Okay.
Yeah. So, reactive attachment disorder is classified in the DSM-5 as a trauma or stressor-related disorder. And so the DSM-5 gives the following criteria for reactive attachment disorder. First, the patient demonstrates a chronic pattern of being emotionally withdrawn and inhibited, which is demonstrated by rarely seeking or being responsive to comfort when distressed. Second, there's evidence of a chronic social or emotional perturbation characterized...
What's that word mean?
Problem, essentially.
Okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm reading that going, I don't know what that word is. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so it's characterized by at least two of the following: social withdrawal and minimal responsiveness to others, negative affect, unfounded or inexplicable episodes of irritability, fearfulness or sadness, or out of proportion reactions to normative stressors. Third, the patient presents with a history of extremely insufficient care, entailing one of the following: deprivation of or social neglect of basic emotional needs for stimulation, comfort, and affection by caring caregivers, the constant flux of caregivers resulting in a destabilized home environment, or growing up in an unusual setting which limits the ability to form selective attachments. Fourth, the child cannot also meet diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder, as the two diagnoses are mutually exclusive. And
Why do you think that is?
because the symptoms look different, but the causes, or the symptoms look really similar, but the causes are different.
So this is saying, though, that if someone does have ASD, they cannot also have RAD.
Correct. And vice versa.
That's so weird. Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry.
So, fifth, the behavioral problem should manifest prior to the age of 5 years, and they must have a developmental age of at least 9 months in order to qualify for the diagnosis.
So does the child have to meet all of those criteria or just some of the criteria? So like if we compare RAD to a personality disorder, I mean, they don't necessarily have to meet all of the bulleted points.
Yeah. So, in this case, yes, a child does have to meet all of the criteria listed. So, we've established that RAD is related to early childhood trauma, particularly in the formative years from birth to age 3. Physical, sexual, and emotional abuse can all play a role, but severe and chronic neglect is the most impactful when it comes to RAD. Neglect is also the most common and insidious form of abuse. Examples of the type of severe neglect that might lead to RAD include not being held or touched often, being left alone in a crib or pen for long periods of time, being left for long periods with soiled diapers, not being fed at regular intervals, caregivers ignoring cries or attempts to engage, or frequently changing household or caregivers. So these acts have to be the norm and occur regularly. So, just want to throw that out there. If you're a mom or dad out there that forgot to change your baby's diaper one time and they sat in it for 8 hours, don't worry, your kid does not have RAD.
So, if we look at Ted Bundy, who you think had RAD, tell us why you think that happened with him.
So there were a couple of things from Ted's childhood that stand out. First, he was literally left at an orphanage for the first few months of his life, and then did not develop a caregiving relationship with his actual mother because he was lied to about his mom being his sister. And then he was also exposed to and experienced significant abuse during his first few years of life.
By grandpa.
By grandpa.
/ dad.
Yep. So, when infants are very young, and very young children experience these types of neglects, they learn that nobody is going to help them or take care of them. So they essentially stop asking for help. Babies whose caregivers don't respond when they cry just stop crying about things. When nobody is there to comfort them or engage with them, they turn inward and stop seeking outside interactions. And since showing emotion does not help them or get support or their needs met, they become emotionless. They don't develop the ability to trust, love, or care for others.
So if this type of, quote, caregiving went on for several years, do you think that the child would have deficits in things like speaking or toilet training, stuff like that?
Yes, it's actually really common for children who experience neglect with or without RAD, also to have physical and cognitive developmental delays.
Well, remember that Ted had a speech impediment?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, the presentation of reactive attachment was most famously observed and noted in children who spent time in Soviet-era state-run orphanages in Eastern Europe, particularly in Romania. So, babies and children had their basic survival needs met. They were given enough food, they had shelter, clothing, and a bed to sleep in, but they did not receive any actual care. Infants were often left alone in a crib, all or most of the time, with nurses only interacting to feed, change, or bathe them. But otherwise, they weren't held or talked to, played with, or rocked to sleep at night. None of those kind of basic caregiving interactions. And so when these children were adopted, they really struggled to adapt to living with a family. And according to Jane Aronson, who is the founder of the Worldwide Orphans Foundation, they had, quote, the worst cases of reactive attachment disorder she'd ever seen.
So regarding this specific situation, was this something that probably occurred all over the world, or was this an especially neglectful group of orphanages? I'm just trying to get a handle on how this actually happens in state-run homes.
So I'm sure that there are orphanages everywhere that are less than ideal, but the orphanages in Romania primarily were especially horrific. So a number of factors happened in the 1980s that led to this occurring. First, the Romanian government banned all contraception and abortion, so there was a large increase in birth rates. Then, economic policies made it difficult for people to make enough money to live on because it was going through austerity measures. And so parents were forced often to abandon their children at orphanages because they could just not afford to take care of such large families. And then finally, the state-run facilities were also suffering under the austerity measures and often did not have enough food, clean water or sometimes electricity, and the staff nurses were often untrained and overwhelmed by the number of children in their care. So it really was just kind of a perfect storm of awfulness. Do you remember at all watching like the news stories that were coming out in the late 80s to early 90s? I have like vague memories of them, but you're slightly older than I am.
Just slightly.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember this, but like most of my childhood, it's kind of a blur unless there was a catchy jingle, and this probably didn't have that.
Probably not. No.
So, I do remember reading in previous classes, sociology classes, that like this situation leads to like failure to thrive, and babies can die, which is like
Yes.
just it's so crazy how even if your physical needs are met, if your emotional and mental needs are not met, like you could die.
Yes, it's true.
It just shows you that people, they need people.
Yeah.
And if we like it or not, we're humans, and we're just social creatures.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the information that we have now about kind of that need for, care and, physical touch and all of that came from the studies that happened with these kids from Romanian orphanages.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we always come into, so this is what the book says, but what does reactive attachment disorder actually look like? So I'm going to refer to a list of behaviors or traits of RAD from the book When Love Is Not Enough, a guide to parenting children with RAD by Nancy Thomas. So there are a number of these, but feel free to interrupt if you have like a question or anything like that.
I will.
So this is just kind of like an idea of what these behaviors might be. Not every RAD kid has every behavior, but these are some things to look out for.
Okay.
So the first one is that they often act superficial and phony, especially around strangers or people they feel they can manipulate in order to be in control.
Meaning like they might act super sweet when they're not?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. They tend to avoid eye contact with the people who love them unless they are lying, conning, and then they make excellent eye contact.
Weird. That's like the opposite of the normal.
Right.
Okay.
Sometimes they can be indiscriminately affectionate with strangers. They don't go through the healthy stranger anxiety period that normal infants go through. They lack the ability to feel real from their heart caring. Giving and receiving affection is not possible without trust. And so these kids are not cuddly or snuggly at all. They have extreme control problems that worsen as the child gets older. They want to do things their way, right or wrong, and they can be very sneaky.
Okay.
They leave a trail of destruction with other kids, pets, and even their own body.
Like they're self-harming?
Sometimes, yeah. So the book quotes Albert Schweitzer, who said, "Anyone who has accustomed himself to regard the life of any living creature as worthless is in danger of arriving also at the idea of worthless human lives." So some kids with RAD do go on to, display cruelty to animals or to commit other, aggressive crimes against people. So, but not all. So lying is a dedicated hobby for RAD children. They often become masters at crazy, twisted stories, outright fabrications, and distortions of the truth. Impulsiveness is common. They see things and they want that thing, and then they steal it or they do it. There is little to no forethought. Often there are learning lags and disorders that are created by the agitated emotional state that they're constantly in, as well as the inability to do it something like the teacher's way. So they actually believe that if they do something someone else's way, someone else wins and they lose. So they kind of get deprived of some learning because they can't learn because they don't want to lose, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So cause and effect thinking is learned during the first year of life. Babies cry, mom comes, things get fixed in normal human development. But the broken cycle creates the problem of not being able to put cause and effect together. Like, I run in the road, a car comes, I die. So they don't get it.
Not a lot of foresight.
Exactly. And like they don't have that, like, if I do this, this is what happens. It's kind of what they're looking at. So everything just seems random to them. Let's see. The little voice in our head, our conscience, that says, no, don't do it, you'll feel bad, or someone else will feel bad. These kids have not developed one of those yet. They don't have that empathy for living things, at least not automatically, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They often have abnormal eating patterns, either like starving or gorging themselves. Other children do not want to be friends with them because of their need to control, their lack of conscience, and their cruelty to others. So they become loners, and without treatment can have a pretty lonely life of broken relationships. The infant rage they often internalize in that first year, instead of internalizing a loving parent, makes them fascinated with things of destruction like fire, blood, gore, and evil, and they often identify with the devil.
Sounds like a fun kid.
They're very hard kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it says, normal people talk for two reasons: to communicate thoughts or feelings. Attachment disordered kids talk for three reasons: to interrupt, make noise, or control. They don't use language to connect. They use it to manipulate and play games. So that often there's a lot of nonsense questions that just kind of pop out. They can be inappropriately demanding and clingy, usually to be cute for strangers or to get something they want. So attachment disordered children have abnormal speech patterns. They have you saying what all the time because they refuse to speak clearly.
They refuse to? They can, but they refuse to?
Yes.
Okay.
Or when you speak to them, they'll say what and sort of like pretend that they don't understand. So most of them are in speech therapy for a long time and don't really care about learning communication skills.
Yeah.
These kids love to tell lies about alleged abuse to authorities by the people who love them. It makes them feel powerful when they are believed, and they are powerful. And so this is one of those cases where you're guilty until you're proven innocent, right? So how do you prove you did not do something? So being, in places like foster care already, it just kind of like continues that cycle of being moved from place to place. So having adults united on one team is very threatening to children who do not trust. And so in order to control, they divide and conquer by pitting one adult against the others. So they do a lot of triangulation. And then this isn't so much about the kids so much, but parents of children with a reactive attachment disorder often appear unreasonably angry. Probably because the more they love their child, the more pain the child dishes out to get them to stop.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. The child believes that love hurts, as it did when his heart was broken as an infant. And they don't use the parent's love to grow emotionally strong. And so parents are essentially abused in their own home. So those are the things to look out for.
I mean, I don't want to say this, it sounds like judgy, but if you are a parent that raised the kid from the get-go and they have reactive attachment disorder, my first inclination is that that parent did something to this kid. I mean, it's not usually something that, like, say, or maybe it could be, correct me if I'm wrong, say they are being babysat for 8 hours a day. Could reactive attachment disorder come from like that babysitter abusing them, or is that relationship, like you're talking about how a parent gets like so frustrated with how much they love their kid, and the more they love their kid, the more the kid is acting out. But like, what did that parent do in the first place to get that kid in that situation?
Right. I think when the book is referring to parents, it's usually foster or adoptive parents.
So we're talking about not the...
Yeah, the only potential way that really a biological parent could be raising a kid with reactive attachment if that child was probably not in their care for some period of time.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad, but it's like reality. I mean, parents do horrible things to their children.
Yeah, exactly.
So...
Yeah. Or it could potentially be, like one parent gets custody after a child has already experienced something horrific by the other parent.
That makes sense.
So it's very rarely like doting, loving parents with a kid who caused the reactive attachment.
Yeah. Well, that's why I didn't know if like a babysitter or a grandmother, but it would have to be someone who was very primarily caregiving to them to make that wound. So,
exactly. It'd have to be the person that they are around
like the most
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for all of those.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
It's sad. All of those were sad things. And it just, I mean, you're describing a very manipulative kid.
Right. And if, you think of it as it's the way that they figured out how to survive. Right. And so to put this into a human kind of form, I have worked with a few children who were diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, all of whom were receiving pretty intensive therapy, either in a therapeutic school or in a residential setting. And so one former client of mine particularly kind of stands out.
And this was at a residential setting?
I worked with them in like a therapeutic day school.
Okay.
Yeah. So this kiddo came into my care when he was about 9 years old. He had just been asked to leave his 30-something foster home due to his violent behaviors. So by 9 years old, he'd been in over 30 foster homes. He had just been, and so the first few weeks, he was with his new foster family and coming to treatment 5 days a week for 6 hours a day. So if you think that's kind of, and I mean, also doing school, but it's a therapeutic environment.
Yeah.
And so the first, few weeks, he did okay. There was some, minor lying and yelling and some defiance and refusing to do schoolwork. But those behaviors were pretty typical for a kid in that program. But then, steadily, as he started to build relationships with staff or peers, the aggression and the refusals increased, and he began to show more rage and act violently towards staff and peers. And then, his foster family talked about possibly adopting him. And that was just too much. He started stealing, lying, running away from his foster home, had major temper tantrums when he did not get what he wanted, and eventually he chased his foster mom down the hall while threatening her with a baseball bat. And so he had to move again after that. This time he went to a residential treatment facility. But the idea of letting somebody love him, take care of him, and possibly growing to love somebody back was just too terrifying for him. He believed it was not possible and he was unworthy. So he acted in a way to ensure that it didn't happen, but it didn't happen on his terms, not on someone else's terms.
Because they want that control.
Exactly.
Well, that sounds like super sad. And the kid was going to finally get a permanent home, but it's like the more they tried to show him they cared, the more he was determined to keep that from happening. Do you, like, it kind of reminds me a little bit of what borderlines do. They'll split on someone when they feel abandonment coming on, if it's real or imagined or whatever.
Yeah, it does look a lot like some of that borderline personality behavior. And really, left untreated, children with RAD often grow up to be adults with attachment and emotional problems, including borderline personality disorder. You know, adults don't really get diagnosed with RAD. It's a children's disorder.
Sure.
But it doesn't just fix itself as he grows up, you know.
You don't grow out of it.
No, you don't grow out of it. Yeah. And so...
It just evolves.
Exactly. Yeah. So...
But there's good news.
Yes, there is good news, and that's that there are treatments for reactive attachment. So attachment-focused family therapy can help parents and children form stronger attachments, manage and reduce violence and other unwanted behaviors, and help children heal from the trauma that they've experienced. It is really hard work, and it is not fast. It takes time and dedication, but it is possible. And so the worst thing that a potential parent, adoptive or foster or whatever, can do is to give up on their child, because that will just reinforce that the child was right to not to trust or care. And unfortunately, because of all those behaviors that we just talked about, it's so hard to parent a child with RAD. You know, sometimes adoptions are revoked or labeled as failed adoptions because an adoptive parent does decide that they can't or don't want to keep a child with such extreme behaviors. And, you know, while I have empathy for how challenging raising a child with RAD is, I hate that failed adoption is even a choice. Like, when you agree to bring a child into your life forever, I don't think you can go back on that, right? There's a difference between, like, I need a lot of help, or maybe my child needs to be in a residential setting for a while we work this out. But it's just unfathomable to me to just, like, give up on a child.
Well, and I mean, I don't really know how it works typically with adoptions, but I would assume there would be a period of time where mostly they're a foster for a while. So these behaviors aren't new to the person who decides to adopt them. Right? I mean, it's not like you go to an orphanage and you pick a kid and you say, I want to take that one home. It's not normally how it works. So if you know what you're getting into, or you think you know what you're getting into, then, you know, that does suck. I mean, I could see if the adoptive parent was like being driven to homicidal ideation because of the child.
I mean, sure.
Which, you know, can happen because, or like they are going to start abusing the child themselves because they just can't handle it. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
Right. And I mean, a lot of kind of these failed adoptions, like, for example, what happened especially when there used to be a lot more foreign adoptions.
Okay.
So like a family would adopt a kid from a
That
Romanian.
they didn't know.
Yep. And it was just like a random, like,
Yeah.
we like this one's name and their face, and so we're adopting this child from somewhere in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And they don't know.
They don't know the child. Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah. That's part of why international adoptions in a lot of places have been kind of stopped.
Okay.
Or are much more regulated now than they used to be.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, well, can you tell us a little bit like what occurs at this therapy?
Yeah. So in attachment-focused therapy for RAD, a therapist works with the parents to set and hold very firm limits with consistency and follow-through of consequences and restorative actions in order to help the child learn to accept and respect limits. So that's important in two ways, right? In one way, they're going to have limits in their lives, and they're going to need to figure out how to accept them if they want to, you know, not end up just in jail. But also, consistency builds trust. So even if the consistency is holding limits, that shows that the child can trust you to do what you say you're going to do.
Okay.
And so that helps build that attachment relationship.
So boundaries creates trust
Yes.
after time.
Yep.
So don't be afraid of your boundaries.
Please don't be afraid of your boundaries.
I admit I struggle with boundaries, but you're saying no. Boundaries create trust and
Boundaries
relationships.
create trust.
Okay.
Yep. And then while this is being worked on, therapy also focuses on building an emotional and caring relationship between the parent and the child. And that sometimes uses acts of intimacy like holding eye contact, physical touch, and prescribed cuddle time. So it's almost like an exposure therapy because children with RAD,
Don't want to be touched.
yeah, they're not affectionate. They don't
Yeah.
hold eye contact because they don't trust it. It makes them uncomfortable. But it's all about slowly increasing. So, like, you might hold eye contact for 10 seconds, and then you hold up to maybe 30 seconds. And, we do cuddle time for 1 minute, and then I let you go. And that builds up over time.
I think my dog has RAD. He hates being cuddled.
No. I mean, some
Or
people
holding eye
just
contact.
aren't really into it, but
I'm not a huge myself,
sure.
so I get that.
But you would expect, for the most part, children and their parents
Right.
to have that level of like trust that
Yeah.
there can be physical affection there.
Yeah.
And so building the affection in first without the actual like feeling or desire for it eventually helps break that cycle of like people showing me care is dangerous to see like, oh, people can show me care
And I'm okay.
and I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And then as all these things all improve, there can be more focus on things like emotional regulation, self-control, and building self-esteem within the kiddo themselves.
Nice.
Yeah. And so we have talked about Ted, right, as having RAD, but some other killers that I think could have had RAD are Donald Gaskins and Tommy Lynn Sells. But I would really need more details about their childhoods before I could say that confidently.
Like, definitely can see Tommy Lynn Sells developing RAD since his mom let his aunt raise him until she sought legal custody, and then his mom yanked him back to her because she got pissed off, and then she just neglected him, and then he turned out swell.
Right.
Do you have any data on how often children who are treated with RAD actually stop meeting the criteria? You said it doesn't just get cured. Does it typically go on to like conduct disorder or ASPD? You did say it could turn into BPD. Just curious how it looks for a kiddo that has it, their future.
Yeah. So I could not find any sort of statistic about like the rates of recovery for RAD in terms of treatment. But the most common diagnoses for adults who may have had RAD in childhood are borderline personality disorder, PTSD, and mood disorders like depression. But there's also an article in Counseling Today that I was reading that referred to antisocial personality disorder as the, quote, adult cousin of RAD, as the behaviors can be very similar. And, some children with RAD that don't get treatment, they don't learn that empathy or other relational skills.
I could see someone getting both, like BPD with ASPD.
Right.
Which when I remember talking to you about this back when I worked with you, and I was like, how can you have BPD and ASPD? Because to me, BPD is like an overabundance of emotion, and ASPD is a lack of emotion. And yet people are diagnosed sometimes with both of those disorders. But if they do have both those disorders, correct me if I'm wrong, because I probably am, they may not have the empathy that comes with ASPD, but their fear of abandonment that comes from the BPD kind of influences how they deal with relationships.
Yeah, no, that's right on.
And that would be a really hard partner to have.
It would be a very hard partner to have.
Might be like a narcissist's dream. I don't know. I still want to talk to some narcissists out there.
Well,
That's a different episode.
that is.
I would love if any of our listeners are diagnosed NPD and would be willing to like have an interview with us. I would be totally, I mean, it wouldn't be at all like a attacking type of thing, because I myself have a personality disorder and we're good people. But
Right. It would
just like,
be about gaining understanding
yeah,
of what
like,
your experiences are
yeah.
like.
And your thought processes and how you deal with emotional situations and all that. I mean, I don't know. I find it fascinating.
Yeah. So if you're out there, go ahead and shoot us an email at addictedtomurderpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes.
All right. So I just kind of looked it up for fun to see like who are some other famous people who were suspected to have RAD.
Our idea of fun is weird.
Yes, it is. Right. And so the two that came up, other than Ted Bundy, because Ted Bundy was on these lists too,
Sure.
were Saddam Hussein, former leader of Iraq, and Edgar Allan Poe, actually.
I mean, all I know about him is his stories are very dark. Or at least
Right.
the ones I read.
So
And how did he die? Was it an overdose or a drunk or alcoholism?
I think it was alcoholism. Like,
But we don't remember off the top of our head.
yeah.
Yeah.
I might have to read a little bit about their childhoods and see what I think.
I mean, I see so many spin-offs in our future. Except for we can barely keep up with the podcasts that we have.
It's true. It's true. And all the other things that we're doing.
True that. I mean, one of these days, maybe I'll do like one of these things where we talk about something in the forensic field.
Ooh.
Where I don't know what, though.
Okay. Well, when you think of something that you're like, this would be a good episode.
Well, there's lots of things I think are really interesting, but others might not.
Oh.
Like eyewitness testimony in the cognitive interview. Those are kind of boring to most people, but
I find them interesting.
okay. Well, maybe I'll figure something out. But our next case, which hopefully part 1 will be next week, but I'm not positive. I already gave it away last episode, but I will just say that if you didn't listen to the last episode, what started my fascination with this particular killer is when I did my final project on his crime scene in my forensic anthropology class in undergrad. So like 10 years ago. I don't remember why I picked it, but when they found all of the stuff, there was a lot of forensic anthropologists in there trying to figure shit out.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. And then ever since then, I'm like, dun, dun, dun. So anyhow, that'll be next week or the week after.
Yes. But we hope you enjoyed this brief interlude from
I did.
learning about serial killers to learning about a really
sad
and often misunderstood diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, because if you saw these, rad kids, like at the playground, or like you had a friend with a rad kid, you'd be like, oh, that kid's the worst. The kid is so bad.
Right.
Or
you just
would
need to
be
discipline
duped.
him more.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, but no, they don't know how to love.
Right. And so the opposite of love is kind of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, all right, everybody. I don't think we have like a weird ending for this one.
No, just if your child has any of those symptoms, please talk to a therapist.
Yes. Go home and go to therapy.
Yes.
All right. So stay safe. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.